everyone. Welcome back to the CCO Follow podcast. Over the course of this month, we've been talking about apologetics. We've talked about what apologetics is. We've talked about some doctrine and what that means and how it relates. And today, we really want to focus on apologetics for today and why do we need apologetics today? So Travis and I have Kirsten Nelson on. Always a pleasure to have her on the podcast. Travis, let's just get started. Apologetics for today. Why is it important today?
Well, I mean, the reality is that with the information age, truth travels fast, but lies travel faster. And
wow, isn't that the truth?
Yeah. And it won't travel as fast as a lie would. And but the reality is that, there's a million and one. If there's one truth, there's, an unlimited amount of falsehoods. And these falsehoods get built up because of the internet, because people are able to hear something and twist it a little bit, and then so you end up with a million versions of this falsehood. All of which attacking the truth, and all of which at the same time, people are always trying to remove the truth because, like the Bible says, men love darkness rather than light because the deeds are evil. And so we already have a propensity to desire falsehood because oftentimes it backs up what we want to be true. And so when you add in a couple thousand years of time between Jesus and today, between the cross and today, but then you also add in things like the internet, the amount of lies that can spread and then can be morphed to create newer bad lies it just continues to build on itself.
Yeah. So what do you think is like the most prominent or important kind of topic in apologetics that is relevant today?
I would argue that the debate about the existence and the definition of truth is absolutely the most fundamental apologetic argument that you need to be aware of, and that affects every area of society, hands down. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what do you mean by that? Let's expound on that.
Yeah. So when you talk about today, you have these competing religious claims, and then you also have the new age atheism, which says that truth doesn't exist at all.
Yeah.
So you either are arguing for the existence of truth, which affects politics, economics, socials, everything.
Yeah.
And you also have the debate about which truth prevails. So if people do agree that truth exists, well, which truth gets to prevail?
Yeah.
Is it a standard, an objective standard of reality that we are all seeking to find and seeking to adhere our whole life to, our whole system of government, politics, economics, all of that? Or is it might is right?
Is it my truth?
Yeah. My truth. And if it doesn't affect you, fine, I can live my truth. But if it does affect you, then if I'm more powerful, then my truth prevails. So that over the ages, since the beginning of time with Adam and Eve in the garden, that has been the fundamental fight in humanity, right? Yeah. The existence of and the definition of truth.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, I think a subset of this that's really been coming out the last, maybe 5 to 8 years is the manipulation of language, and not just like a redefining terms, but starting to embrace language having no meaning, which is kind of like it's a subset of truth, because you have to believe that language has an actual definition, and which is true.
Yep.
And to what level we adhere to that, right? Yeah. Because we can say, oh, this means this, but it's not that important. So where are we then? It's just like we're communicating in nothingness. Yeah,
we're getting more and more. And we talked about this I think it was last week, about deconstructionism and where its roots come from, how it just took like the idea of language and essentially truth, because language is ideally communicating truth, and just says like, well, we can't even know what they were meaning. And that we're seeing that just everywhere. I think it was 3 years ago, I was talking to someone who was in college, and this person is, doesn't believe in Jesus, English major, all this kind of stuff. And they were talking about how they were so proud of this too, how in their classes, they've gone beyond, just interpreting stuff. And they've realized that, everyone literally their job in the class, like their assignments were to take some old piece of writing, like a Shakespeare play or whatever, and to come up with whatever they thought it could mean.
Ugh.
And I was like, do you guys, and I was like, okay, well, that's an interesting exercise. It makes you, maybe read into things the author hadn't intended. I was like, but do you guys ever talk about what the author meant? And they're like, well, of course not. And I was like, why not? And they're like, well, because this is a much more intellectual pursuit. And I'm like, how is it more intellectual to just make up anything you want than it is to really put yourself in that person's shoes, try to identify what is actual reality. In my mind, that's harder. I mean, if you're looking for buried treasure, it is much harder to find the treasure than it is to just dig any hole you want. And essentially, our culture has encouraged, dig any hole you want means whatever you mean. And it's kind of a subset of the lack of truth and stuff like that, but it's specifically regarding language, not just redefining terms, but just not caring, caring what words even mean anymore. And that's scary in my mind.
Yeah. And you see that a lot in art, and what you're saying is this painting really speaks to me in this way, and it's
and I remember
there's a level of okay, but if that starts to feed over into our everyday lives and our set of views, our worldview, that's kind of scary.
Well, and I remember when I was in college, I had an English teacher at SPSCC who we had a couple assignments like that, where it's take this piece of art and interpret it. And I feel like that's one level, because art is intended to be more interpretable, but it also wasn't this artist never had an intention. Even if they did, who cares? Yours is just as valid or more valid. And now today it's no, what you believe and what anyone believes, this passage, this written work, this art, whatever, is your interpretation is just possibly even more valid than the author or artist's original intent, which makes zero sense.
We can't parse out the difference between subjective and objective truth. And it used to be where we were postmodern in the soft sciences, right? But now we're becoming postmodern in the hard sciences.
Define postmodern.
So postmodern is we are beyond truth, right? So truth is subjective. Every truth is subjective.
Gotcha.
There is no objective reality, and anybody who said so is a bigot or a verbal terrorist or whatever they like to call us these days. And so it used to be where the soft sciences were, arts and logic and things like that were under attack. But now it's the fabric of scientific truths. When you're seeing that very clearly in the transgender debate right now, where it's no longer enough to say that truth is what you want it to be in art or in who you get to love or spend your life with. It's now truth is your truth in very objective standards of reality, like your physical existence. So that's where postmodernism gets scary, because there was a time when it was only those particular subjects that were under attack, but now it's bled over into science, and the seeds were planted a long time ago. We're just bearing that fruit now. And people are starting to take it more seriously, but I don't know if it's too late or not. So
I think the scariest thing about seeds that were planted before that are bearing fruit now is that in your own life, you will plant seeds today that bear fruit in your own life 10 years from now. It's just a reality of how God sets stuff up. But in culture, when we bury seeds and then their seeds are revealed 80 years from now, people are reaping them who never planted them, which means they don't have the understanding and ties to what led them where they are. And many people today are flat out ignoring them on purpose. And so, if you plant a seed today that impacts your life in 5 years, you have potential to repent. You have potential for correction. When it's culturally, there's always potential, but I feel like we're so far removed that a lot of culture, they're essentially it's just boiling the frog. You know what I mean? It's the classic, it's happened. They're just fish in water. So much for culture is just so blind to how unreasonable this is. It's incredible the conversations you'll have when you know someone who is so far down deep in this that just can't see. And it's mildly terrifying.
So really, we're talking about finding truth. What do we do then if we're identifying these things? What's for us to do? How do we stop this?
Well, I think you have to do your homework. It's a very common tactic right now in these debates to just we don't know enough, so let's not touch it, right? So if you don't know enough, you're not going to be able to understand your opponent. So in speech and debate, right? Like the fundamental thing you need to do is you need to understand your opponent better than you understand yourself. You need to understand their arguments, what they believe, and you build your defense against their arguments based on what they've said. So like, for example, if you have critical race theory in schools, like it's not enough to just have like a surface level understanding of what that is. If you actually want to enter into the debate arena and have anything valuable to say, you need to read what they're saying. You need to watch the protests. You need to listen to their podcasts. You need to submerge yourself into that world so thoroughly that you understand them even better than they might understand themselves. And then you compare that to the reality and the standard of truth that we have in God and his word. And you're able to come at it in a much better way and much more constructive way. And it gives you, it humanizes the other person, right? Because if you seek to understand them, then you care that they're an image bearer, right? You care that they're a person made in the image of God.
That's good, yeah.
And so you're not just debating an idea, an ideology, which is where so much anger comes from. Like it's a faceless, entity that you're debating, and I'm right and you're wrong, and by golly. But if you get to know the people, you get to know their ideas, then when you're debating them, you have compassion, you have understanding. You can, like this book talks about, spit and chew, or chew and spit. You're chewing on what they're saying, you're parsing out what's good from what's bad. You can bring that to the table when you're talking to somebody and say, I agree that what you're saying here is right. But I disagree on this, and here's why.
Yeah. So you mentioned book.
Yeah.
Let's talk about it. What is the book? Why are we talking about it?
Yeah. So this book, Mama Bear Apologetics, Empowering Your Kids to Challenge Cultural Lies, was written by a host of authors, different women that seek to equip moms and hopefully dads too who read this book to understand the lies that are prevalent in our culture today and understand how to address them and prepare your kids. So the idea is that as a mama bear or papa bear, your desire is to protect your kids, and you don't want to just throw them to the wolves, right? They're only going to be in your house for a short time. And for most kids, they're subjected to worldliness and the culture already, you know, if they're out in public school or if they are engaged in any kind of sports or anything like that, they're getting it firsthand. So you can't inoculate your kids against this, or protect them against this without equipping them to battle. So that's what this book, the idea behind it is.
Yeah. And the book does a really good job. Like the first couple chapters is about essentially kind of the method and process of thinking through things. And then it goes into like 11 different topics that are really prevalent today. Some of them a little less prevalent today, but they were ones, and they talk about how they led to some of the stuff we experience today. And so you kind of see the backdrop. And I think they do a good job in this book emphasizing that you need to have discussions with your kids and not just shut them down and be like, I just learned this thing, so that's wrong. Like, you're done with this. We're already dealing with it with our oldest, James. He's 8. He's way into reading.
Very curious.
And and it was, I think, a year and a half ago. So he was 6.5 and, loves dinosaurs like every child, and was reading all these books about evolution and all these books about all these different stuff. And rather than just being like, James, this is wrong, like, we're not going to check out these books anymore. Because one of the things I'm afraid of is them growing up, and if we just simply tell them that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong.
That's their go-to. Well, my dad said this was wrong.
And then eventually maybe they hear something that we haven't talked about, and they think, well, maybe his dad was just wrong about all these things, and they haven't thought through it. And so instead of doing that, I was like, And so I'd have him read me the books, and we'd get to parts that were contradictory. And I'd be like, hey, did you notice on this page it says this, but on this page it says that? I was like, that doesn't make any sense. I was like, those two things can't both be true. And he was like, and we'd keep going. And over a course of a couple weeks, I'd be like, James, do you realize? And we just talk about like, there's benefit to people thinking that evolution is how we came about. There's benefit to think like all these different things. And the way that came about it was not intellectually honest. And so we talked about, the scientific method. We talked about intellectual honesty. We talked about motives that people might have to push certain agendas. And helped lead him to have the tools to deal with lies in the future.
Yeah.
And if you can have a lot of conversations with your kids and just loved ones in general or strangers, and along the way, instead of just telling them you're wrong, you're right, you're giving them tools to discern it themselves, they're much better off.
Yeah. Well, and this is kind of answering the question even more, because you were saying this idea of truth and postmodernism and how it kind of takes a long time, like you said, 80 years of things, different generations. Well, that means it's really, really important that, for me, if I don't have a kid, I might be like, this is crazy. What are they doing? And I might, figure out my own way through. But the reality is the answer to this is generational. It doesn't stop. Like, it stops with us unless we continue it with our kids in the next generation.
Yeah.
And I think it's so important, and I'm so happy that we brought up this book and we're bringing this up, because in my mind, that's like the biggest change factor. And God uses this all throughout history. We read through it where he uses generations to learn lessons and to teach, and it's like it's really important for us to key in on that, I think, because that is what is going to change things later on. It might not change in our lifetimes, but it could with the next generation. And so, I think I'm kind of fired up talking about apologetics and how we interact with our kids and how do we teach that. So I'm curious, Kirsten, for you, when did it kind of come up, apologetics with your kids in your life?
Well, I wasn't raised in a Christian home, and so I swallowed every lie that culture gave me, from Disney to science to social interactions. And I saw a very real detrimental effect in my life because of that. Like, the practical consequences didn't take generations. It was very real in my lifetime. And so when I didn't want to have kids for the longest time, my husband and we talked about this for many years before we thought about having kids, because I was like, I don't want to enter into this lightly, because I know that what I believe and the lies that I swallowed and that God is still revealing to me, like, I don't want to pass those on, right? Yeah. And so, having kids really pushes you to be like, oh my gosh, not only do I need to know my stuff, but I need to model it. And it was talked about in the book a little bit. I think it's really an important part of the discussion with kids, with anybody that you're wanting to pass on apologetic truths to, or if you're in ministry and you're ministering to youth or young adults. We can only take our kids and those we're ministering to as far as we ourselves have gone. Yeah. And so I think a lot of Christians I've talked to are like, apologetics, it's too heady for me. It's too hard for me. I don't think that it's actually that helpful. And then we just like go with the flow, right? And what the flow is worldliness. It's ungodliness. It's lies. It's unbiblical thoughts permeating our minds, and we don't have a standard by which to measure the things that we're absorbing, the TV shows we're watching, the music we're listening to, the books we're reading, the kind of conversations we're having with our friends. And if we don't have that standard for ourselves, we're not going to be modeling that for our kids, and we're not going to be modeling that for the next generation in the church that we're ministering to. So they talk a lot in this book about the scary statistics of youth not just abandoning their faith when they go to college and they're challenged, but they're abandoning their faith in middle school and elementary school in their own homes. And I think the reason that that's happening is because the parents are not understanding the truth of God's word, and they're not living it out. So the kids do not find faith or truth relevant because their parents aren't living the relevance. They themselves are not modeling that relevance to their kids. So when their kids are at home and they're watching their parents watch certain things or listen to certain things or have certain conversations, and then they go to church and they see something different, they're like, this isn't relevant for me. There's no consistency. And then when they go into the real world, right, on their own, they're in college, and they're faced with suffering, trials, the lies of the world, and they were not watching that being modeled well in their home, that parents suffering with Christ in the center of it all. They weren't seeing their parents modeling, caring about truth, picking up their Bible, reading it, praying, like modeling faith out loud in front of their kids, not even just sitting them down and teaching, but just doing it themselves. So when they go into the real world, they not only find it irrelevant, but they find it unhelpful because they don't know how to navigate very practical real world scenarios with the faith that their parents didn't pass on. Yeah. So for me, I didn't want that. And I'm not saying that by any of the stretch of the imagination that I'm a perfect parent or that I perfectly model it, but I wanted to be eyes wide open. I wanted to be fully aware. And so we do apologetics in my house we start every school day with worship, Bible study, prayer, and apologetics equipment, because
that's cool.
I don't want my kids to be eaten alive, by the world that hates them and hates the God that they worship. And I at least want them to understand what it is that they're getting into. And so, we just talk about these things. There's no subject that's off limits. My kid's only 5 and 2, but we talk about these things. And they ask questions, they ask questions.
And just to point out, like, the example you gave is like, oh, well, they're not living the same life at home as they are at church, stuff like that. Sean McDowell had a great book about people leaving, new generations leaving the church, and he talked about like they're leaving their faith in middle school and high school. It's just they didn't have the ticket to get on the bus till college, and to actually like leave. Permission. And one of the examples at the end of each chapter, he had a parent interviewed that expressed their situation, and one of them they described it as, we raised our kid in church but not in Jesus. And you can live the same life at church as you do at home. You can give the good examples, stuff like that, but not equate that this is true. There's actual stuff in logic and reasoning that prove this is true, that this is something holistically, like you're saying, like not showing your suffering, just showing that, oh, you're the good, perfect family. There's so many layers to it. It's not merely just people who are inconsistent in showing, that they follow Jesus at home as they do in church. Because I think sometimes that's the expectation. It's like, well, as long as you're the same at church as you are at home, everything's fine. And it's like, no, because you're not leading them necessarily to Jesus for one, but also you're not equipping them to discern between things when they're older. And that really is the issue that we're talking about here.
Well, it's like the conversation that we have about blind faith, it's not blind faith. And that's what I love about what we're talking about in apologetics is it's not what we're doing it's not indoctrinating. It's really actually being scientific about it. It's trying to figure out, hey, what is actually going on here? What's actually the truth? Let's take all the evidence and let's figure it out. And I just think that's really cool. Yeah.
And for those of you who are listening who maybe don't do homeschooling, or your kid's already older or whatever, the two things that I find really helpful is to just show that you're always a learner. So like when our boys, they're 6 and 8, and they'll show interest in, the lunar eclipse that recently happened, or just different stuff that, they're just interested in. Sometimes we know the answer and we tell them. When we don't know the answer, we look it up, either for them, bring it back to them, or with them, and show them like, mommy and daddy care about truth. We care about actually knowing these things, just like you do, and just like walking alongside them. But then also, like you were saying about the, like, every conversation's open. Part of what was such a blessing to my faith was when I was in public school. And when I was in middle school, they started teaching evolution. And my parents had nothing about nothing. They were just like, we don't know. But there were a lot of youth leaders, and there were other people in my life who did really care about those subjects particularly. And, you will not know everything about everything. You just won't. But like when we talked about with Tad being the person who's like, I don't know, I'm going to look into this. And doing that with your kids, doing that with friends, doing that with people who come to you. And then for the things that you're still like, I'm looking into this, but this is still above my head. Learning people that you can go to about certain subjects. I'm going to keep this really vague, but you'll probably know who it is that I'm talking about in a second. But someone was telling me recently that they were like, I was trying to disciple this person, and they had all these questions, and at some point I reached above my pay grade, and I just had no clue how to answer. So I sent them to Kirsten. And they were like, a couple weeks later, they had met with her and talked with her, and a couple weeks later, all their questions were answered. And now it's going great. And
it's a bad standard to set. Nobody asked me for anything. Just kidding.
And the reality is that like we're a body, Like no one's gonna know everything about everything. No one's gonna be the right person to communicate everything to every person. Even if you know all the answers to a certain question, they may not just receive it from you. And sure, that's on them, and they should grow. But at the same time, we're a body, and we're here to minister with each other, for each other, towards each other. Like this isn't you by yourself alone.
Yeah, I think that's important. I like to say to my children, and they won't absorb it now because they're too young, but as they get older, I hope this will be a good mantra for them, to not exchange what you do know for what you don't know.
Yeah.
And so basically that means that you don't be afraid to stand on the truths that you have to discuss with whoever, because God is sovereign, right? He brings the people and the circumstances and the conversations into our life. Yeah. And so he's either using that situation to help somebody else learn more about who he is, or he's using it to grow you and your understanding and your ability to handle what you don't know, because we're limited people on purpose. The only being in the entire universe who knows everything all the time is God, and we are dependent on him for that. So he has given us stuff we do know, right? Even if it's just a fundamental faith, I was once lost but now I'm found, I was once blind and now I can see. That is not an irrelevant place to start in apologetics. You knew who you once were, and you knew what God actually did. That is a real truth statement about who you once were and now who you are. So you can use that as a launching pad to have conversations in apologetics. And then as you grow in your faith, learn more, read books, talk with people, be willing to be humble and admit, I don't know everything. But what frustrates me the most when I talk to other Christians about this is like, I just naturally love this kind of stuff, so I just eat it up, right? And not everybody's like that. And so I think it's intimidating for people to be like, well, I don't know as much. And it's like, that's fine. Like, we're not all going to know everything. But what frustrates me is when people just stop trying because they don't know everything. So what they're doing is exchanging what they do know for what they don't know, and you're giving up ground, and it's not helpful to the person who's coming to you. Saying, I don't know, let me look into that, is a great backup, right? And it's not even a backup. It's just a humble place to be. It's a recognition that I don't know everything. God does. Let's go to him together. Rather than just saying, that's too hard. I don't understand this. I'm not going to try.
Well, there's a responsibility. Like at the end of the day, we have responsibility. We're not, we're not just, okay, Jesus, take the wheel. He is in control, but we have a responsibility, and I think he's going to give us all of these opportunities, and sometimes those opportunities are to humble us and show us, whoa, I actually need to step up on this. And sometimes those opportunities are exactly that, where it's just like, I don't know everything about this, but let me start here. Let me tell you about my faith and what's happened to me, and just that is the key. And I love what you're saying is I just encourage, everyone in the church, don't flake your responsibility. Don't just push it off. If you don't know, that's good. That's great. Cause now it's giving you the responsibility. Okay, I should know this. I gotta research this.
And like you had mentioned earlier, just how like you need to prepare yourself like it's a debate, but when you actually debate, like, remember this is a person, and like it's not to win points in a debate, it's to win souls, and it's to help people see light. And it makes me think of like Tad's conversation where he said that in general he just aims to put a pebble in their shoe, and usually that's not even by him bringing something new to the table. Usually it's by just pointing out inconsistency in their own argument. Which
takes getting to know them.
Exactly. It takes listening. It takes and which that makes books like these all the more valuable, because you have a primer on the general thing. So you're not just completely blindsided and confused, but you also aren't spending 20 books listening to each subject or paying attention to each subject so in depth that then when you get to an actual conversation, you're tempted just to like steamroll with all the stuff you've learned. And instead you have a primer to then listen to this person. A really good example I heard recently from, I'm going to keep it vague, is someone close to me came out as essentially transgender. I mean, there's a million combinations of how people describe themselves now, but essentially, she does not believe she's a she. And they were talking to someone close to both of us, and they were just like, I don't, exemplify all of the classical women traits, therefore I'm not a woman. And this guy who's also, you know, decently far from Jesus right now, but was just responded with kind of like I mean, I don't exemplify every single thing that's, you know, considered manly. Does that make me not a guy? Like, is that really our standard now, that like, well, I'm not the most womanly classic woman in the world, therefore I'm not a woman, period.
Sure.
And he you know, he didn't bring all this other stuff. He didn't bring, like, he just was like, your argument doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And that, out of all the conversations I've heard about happening with this person, that was the most effective one.
Yeah.
To just make them pause and be like, huh? Because instead of attacking with, you know, well, what about this? What about this? What about this? It was actually just kind of like, you know, that thing you said doesn't resonate with me. It doesn't feel complete.
Sure.
And it's forcing them to go, wait a second, is this not complete? And if so, if not, why not? And maybe they'll ask you, well, why doesn't that feel complete? And you can tell them, or maybe they'll say, I need to chew on this. And like Tad said, you put a pebble in their shoe.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's what happens. You know, that's what happened with James with the dinosaur books. It was just like, I didn't say, here's everything I know about carbon dating, everything I know about layers and all this other stuff. It was instead like, this doesn't work, does it? That doesn't work either.
Yep.
And walking him through, putting a pebble in his shoe to where it was a couple weeks of him just like chewing on this until eventually, I asked him a few weeks later, I was like, hey, what happened to your dinosaur books? He was like, well, they're not true. And I was like, well, I mean, some of the stuff is true. And he's like, well, yeah, but I'm not going to read about X, Y, and Z because that's just not, you know, that's not true.
Wow.
So he still reads dinosaur books, but the ones that promote, you know, evolution, the ones that promote billions of years, he's like, I'll find a dinosaur book that's just about the dinosaur itself and what we possibly know about the dinosaur and what we think, not about all this additional stuff. And I was just cool. Way to go, James. Like, you know.
Well, so we've talked about this book a little bit, and you brought up, you know, postmodernism. It's kind of a big word. There's a lot of big words that this book covers.
Don't ask me to define anything.
Let's go through. Like, I don't know if you have a list or something that we could talk about.
I can read the list, and then if maybe there's one that really stood out to you,
we can just look in the book, and I can read it because I brought it. So, which one do you want to talk about?
Well, so
let's just go through because this is important for us to know. Like,
just because the word exists.
Maybe you've heard this word before, but you have no idea, and maybe it interests you.
Yeah, and then maybe one of these particularly, you were like, yeah, this was either a good chapter or this is a good topic.
Yeah.
So they talk about things like self-helpism. They put that in quotes, but naturalism, skepticism, postmodernism, moral relativism, emotionalism, pluralism, new spirituality, Marxism, feminism, progressive Christianity. And so those,
a lot.
That's
a lot.
Yeah.
The
and
isms.
so, and that was, again, the book starts with kind of like, here's how you think about things. Here's how you look into these issues and digest them and talk about them, and especially talk to your kids about them. And then they kind of did, I don't know, but would you say like 15 pages on each of these specific topics, and was like, here's the basics of where it came from, what it is, like, you know, in a paragraph definition. Here's basically what it covers. Here's some of the arguments for it, against it, how you can talk to your kids about it.
Well, and I think it's like, if you're hearing this, you're like, whoa, whether you like it or not, these are the ideas that are being are bombarding us, our children, the next generations.
Well, and there's real people who really believe these things. Like, actually hold to these things like they're true.
And in the church.
And I mean, facts. I mean, I think it was Alicia Childers. Was it Alicia Childers who wrote the 5 Lies?
Yeah.
The recent one?
She's fantastic. Yeah.
So, I mean, she did that. Tim Barnett and her just finished the book about deconstruction in the church.
Fantastic.
I can't get through that book.
Oh, really?
I'm literally in chapter 2. I have to pause it every like.
Are you listening to it?
Yeah, like 2-3 minutes and just cry. Like, I hate it. It makes me so sad.
No.
But there's so, like, right now there's so many books, and a lot of them are being written specifically like, people in the church believe this, and this is wrong biblically. Here's why. I mean, that's why American Gospel and American Gospel 2 and the third, like, that's why they came out too. Those movies, because so much of this is prevailing in the church. But even the ones that aren't, this is what is being taught, being encouraged, being brought into politics and conversation, and real people are really being hurt by these things because they're not true. And every lie hurts people, but some lies, because of how largely are hurt people more.
Yeah.
And it's we're seeing the results.
So out of this little list, what kind of stood out to you the most that you would encourage Travis and I, or those listening and watching, to read up on?
Oh man, well, postmodern. I mean,
pick your favorite child.
Postmodernism, really, like I said, the argument and debate about truth and what its definition is. These are all so good. I don't know. Okay, well, I mean, I'm not picking this because I think it's the most relevant. As in the list, like there's not really a hierarchy. They're all good and they're all, but something that's been just on my mind more recently is Marxism. We've been my husband and I have been watching the Daily Wire, What We Saw series, which it just goes through the history of communism, Marxism, and the ripple effect across the world. And Marxism, communism, socialism, they're all the same thing, essentially. They're
close.
Yeah. They has had the seeds and the fruit have borne more deaths across human history than any wars combined, any other ideology combined. And it should, I sound like such an old person right now when I like communism is the greatest threat to
OG
America.
Captain America right now.
Oh my gosh.
You're gonna punch the Marxists in the face.
My husband is teaching our 2-year-old, who is very articulate and can speak very well for a 2-year-old, to say, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. And
no.
He knows it now. So anyway, if you don't know who Mr. Gorbachev is, go look it up, go Google it. But yeah, Marxism, it is accounted for more deaths in human history than any other ideology. And it is in our country.
It's pretty
we
prevalent,
have self-proclaimed communists and Marxists in government all across this country, from mayors to governors to city council members. I mean, our state alone. I mean, and we haven't seen the fruit as other countries have seen, but we're well on our way.
Well, and for those who are listening, definitely look into Marxism. The Mulberry Apologetics chapter on it is really good. What's so scary about it, because you can, there's arguments about free market versus government ran market, all those kind of things, very secondary. What really destroys humanity and God's design with Marxism is its removal of every power, authority, and structure outside of government. And so you might be familiar with the idea that God has instilled family, church, and government. And they have different roles, and there's different values and all these kind of different things. But family and church are the
destruction of
So Marxism destroys the authority of parents with their kids, the family. It destroys all authorities outside of government, including church and things like that. And so that's what really creates the destruction that Marxism brings, is because it's the idea of essentially all entities and all authorities outside of government should be removed, including especially the parents and family, which is what we're seeing in our own country right now.
But that comes from, even more fundamentally, I think, a distorted view of human nature. The reason why Marxism is so appealing to people is because it gives an elevated sense of our goodness, our innate goodness. People are innately good. And if you set up this utopian society, again, communism has never been fully realized textbook Marxist style, because too many people die in the process, and revolution is bloody, and it doesn't work out the way that they want it to, because they misunderstand human nature. We are fundamentally not just flawed and broken. We're fundamentally wicked, evil people in our nature. So the idea that government is going to come in and solve all of your problems, when those pesky masses of people just aren't doing what we want them to, if we can't kill enough of them to do what we want them to do, then by golly, government's going to step in, right? And government is full of flawed, fundamentally, innately human, wicked people. And so you can't escape that reality. And so all you have is a smaller group of more power hungry authoritarian types telling everybody else what needs to happen. And it hasn't played out in our country the way it has in other countries across society. And I'm not a fear monger. This is a real issue, and we're seeing it just very basically in our, like, even the student loan forgiveness program, things like that, where we're eroding the economic structure, but we're also eroding the moral structure that is going to pave the way for this to come in and take full root. Yeah.
Well, and again, kind of like the putting a pebble in someone's shoe. If you know someone who's believes in Marxism, and you are aware of how they remove power authorities, how they believe that humans are naturally good, one of the pebbles you can put in their shoe is like, well, if humans are naturally good, why do we even need a government then?
Yeah, exactly.
If we're naturally good, then we don't need any authority structure. Like, why are they even wanting it? It shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. Like, you should, ask them as well. Like, why is it that, the ones who create Marxism and promote Marxism are the ones in power? Why is it that they say, well, no one should be in charge but us?
Yeah.
That should always be a red flag. Like, that's always a concerning, weird thing.
Yep.
And again, it's just pebbles.
Yep.
And it's finding, this is our belief. Oh, well, if that belief was true, there's a disconnect. And they have to either say, well, I'm just going to blindly go with this because that's what I want, which you can't convince someone who just wants what they want. Or they go, okay, I need to rethink this because something here is broken.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I think it was really cool that we got to talk about apologetics and the next generation and different things that we should be on guard about and research about. Travis, as always, thank you for being here, helping me, because I am not an apologetics whiz like you guys. But I'm learning, and that's what I love about this month is every episode I'm getting more information. I'm learning, and it's kind of putting kindling to the fire here for me, learning apologetics. So thank you.
I should also mention the Mom Bear Apologetics book. I got the physical book, but also I haven't looked through it yet, but they have a study guide booked. Have you looked at that one yet?
I haven't done the study guide yet.
So I'm going to look into the study guide, but I'll link to both of them on the page. And what I'm getting at, though, is that there's many resources out there.
Yeah.
There's books, but also many of them have accompanying study guides that you can walk through other people with, you can walk through yourself with. And, this is something, it takes time, but it's worthwhile.
And don't forget, the whole idea of this podcast is, we have a resource page, the follow resource page.
Yeah.
In every episode, in every topic, series, we put all these really great tools and resources available. So definitely, if you're listening, you're watching, or you want to learn more about this, don't forget that we have that page on our website. Thanks for coming on. Thanks for listening and joining us today. We look forward to the next one. As always, God bless.